They say the loudest person in the room is often the weakest. In a world addicted to noise, silence is now the rarest and most misunderstood form of power. But why? Why does silence terrify some and empower others? The answer lies not just in social psychology, but in the very fabric of how human beings interact with control, dominance, and perception. Let's begin with a simple image. A boardroom in Chicago. A dozen executives sit around a long table. The topic is urgent. A decision must be made. Everyone is talking, loud, fast, eager, except one man, Thomas. He sits still, hands folded, eyes calm. He says nothing. And yet, the entire room watches him. They anticipate his voice. They fear his judgment. Why? Because silence, when deliberate, transforms into authority. This isn't new wisdom. Niccolo Machiavelli, the Renaissance political strategist, saw through the illusion of speech long before social media and round-the-clock news cycles turned self-exposure into a cultural norm. He understood that when you reveal your intentions, you hand your enemies a blueprint to sabotage you. But silence? Silence is a blank canvas, one no opponent can decipher. Think of Julius Caesar, one of the most cunning military tacticians in Western history. When he crossed the Rubicon, an act that sparked civil war and toppled the Roman Republic, he didn't announce it. There were no declarations, no rallies, only action. Swift, unapologetic, decisive. By the time the Senate realized what had happened, Caesar was already in control. This wasn't luck. It was strategy. And yet today, we are told to share everything, to talk through our emotions, to explain our goals, to post our plans. But here's the brutal truth. Exposure makes you vulnerable. The more people know about your ambitions, your fears, your next move, the more power they have over you. Every explanation you give becomes a potential weapon in someone else's hands. If you've ever told someone your dream only to have them scoff, you've felt it. If you've laid out your plans and seen someone beat you to execution, you've lived it. In psychological terms, this is the danger of predictive behavior. When you're predictable, you're manipulatable. Silence strips away that predictability. It forces others to guess. And when they're guessing, they make mistakes. Machiavelli didn't preach silence out of weakness. He championed it as a form of misdirection, a form of delay, a way to unnerve, to unbalance, to dominate without confrontation. Leaders who speak less are often perceived as more intelligent, more powerful. This is known in psychology as the halo effect. People assign positive traits to individuals who maintain control and restraint. Silence, therefore, becomes not just a behavior, but a statement. So here's the challenge. In a culture that rewards oversharing and constant communication, how do you learn to be silent with purpose? How do you resist the urge to defend yourself, to justify your choices, to broadcast your intentions? That is where true strength lies. Not in winning debates or making speeches, but in being so grounded that you do not need validation. In the parts to come, we'll break this down further. We'll look at how silence operates as a psychological weapon, how it creates fear, how it becomes armor, how it multiplies impact. But for now, remember this. Silence isn't the absence of words. It is the presence of control. The less they know, the more they guess, and the one who controls the guessing controls the game. Power isn't just about force. It isn't just about intelligence or resources. At its deepest level, power is perception. It's the ability to control how others see you, think about you, respond to you. And there is no more potent tool to shape perception than silence. Silence confuses. It unsettles. It draws attention without asking for it. Imagine a heated conversation. Everyone's emotions are high, voices raised, accusations flying, and there's one person, let's call her Susan, who simply refuses to engage. She doesn't explain herself. She doesn't defend her position. She doesn't flinch. What happens? The energy of the room starts circling around her. Her silence becomes a gravitational force. Bomb, because people fear what they cannot read. This phenomenon is rooted in a psychological principle known as the ambiguity effect. Humans dislike uncertainty. When they can't predict or label something, their minds begin to fill the gap with assumptions, often exaggerated and fear-based. Silence, then, becomes a canvas for projection. They assume you know more. They assume you are stronger. They assume you're dangerous, and that assumption is power. Machiavelli understood this well. In The Prince, he wrote about the necessity of misdirection, of concealment, of strategic ambiguity. Not because he believed in deception for its own sake, but because he knew that control of perception is control of outcome. When you talk too much, you reveal your playbook. When you stay silent, you become unreadable. And unreadable is unchallengeable. Let's take this further. Think about negotiations, whether it's business, relationships, or politics. The first person to speak is often the one who loses. Why are you going? Because silence creates pressure. It makes people uncomfortable. They start to fill the gap with unnecessary words, often exposing their position, their desperation, their limits. The person who can endure silence longer gains the upper hand, not through aggression, but through control. In every social dynamic, the one who appears the most composed has the most influence. Silence enhances that composure. It amplifies the presence of the quiet one. In a psychological sense, this is called the authority bias. People instinctively assign credibility to those who exude calm and restraint. They see it as a sign of depth, wisdom, power. But silence is not passivity. It must be intentional. There's a difference between not knowing what to say and choosing not to say it. When you master silence, you're not withdrawing from the game. You're mastering it. You're playing the long game, letting others expose themselves while you collect information, while you build leverage. And here's the trap most people fall into. They believe being loud proves confidence, that explaining yourself proves intelligence, that speaking often proves leadership. It's a myth. In truth, the loudest one is usually the most insecure. The one who constantly explains is the one who fears judgment. The one who talks endlessly is the one trying to fill a void. But the one who listens, the one who observes, the one who sits in stillness, he holds the hidden sword. So ask yourself, how often do you speak just to fill space? How often do you explain when you could have remained silent? What if your silence became your statement? What if your pause became your power? In the next part, we'll explore how silence doesn't just protect your plans, it actively dismantles your opponents. Because the game of power isn't about noise. It's about knowing when to speak and when to let the silence speak for you. Now let's talk about the deeper layer, the psychological warfare embedded in silence. Because silence isn't just protective, it's corrosive. It wears down your opponent's certainty. It destabilizes their mental ground. When used correctly, it becomes a weapon sharper than any sword. Picture John, a senior attorney in New York. He's in the middle of a high-stakes legal negotiation. The other side lays out their offer, confident, rehearsed, expecting a counter. But John says nothing. He leans back, folds his arms, and watches. 10 seconds pass, then 15. The room shifts. The air thickens. The opposing attorney clears his throat, glances nervously at his notes, and begins justifying his offer without being prompted. In less than a minute, the balance of power flips. All John did was sit in silence. This is the power of psychological pressure. When people are met with silence, their brains begin filling the void with their own fears and insecurities. Psychologists call this the projection principle. When we lack information, we substitute it with our own internal narratives. So if someone already doubts their position, your silence will amplify that doubt. If they fear rejection, your silence becomes rejection. If they're unsure, your silence becomes a mirror reflecting back their uncertainty. Now think about conflict. Someone insults you. They expect a reaction, a defense, a rebuttal, an escalation. But what happens when you don't respond? You don't flinch. You don't even blink. Their words bounce off silence. Suddenly, the power of their insult is gone. The attack withers. Why? Because silence denies them the one thing they crave: validation. When you react, you reward them. When you defend yourself, you acknowledge their judgment. But when you say nothing, you force them to face their own motives. They begin to question why they said what they said. They may even begin to feel foolish, embarrassed, exposed. This is how silence flips the script. It makes others turn their attention inward, confronting their own shadows while you remain composed, unaffected. Machiavelli understood this implicitly. He believed that silence, when combined with calculated mystery, triggered anxiety in others. The unknown is always more terrifying than the known. If your enemy doesn't know what you're thinking, they begin preparing for the worst. They overestimate your resources. They second-guess their strategies. They hesitate, and in hesitation, there is weakness. In your personal life, this can be just as powerful. Think of an argument with a spouse or a business partner. Instead of meeting anger with anger, you pause, you listen, and then you wait. That silence speaks louder than any rebuttal. It says, I am in control. I am not here to convince. I am here to decide. This unnerves people far more than yelling ever could. The lesson is simple but hard to live. Never underestimate the discomfort your silence creates. Don't rush to fill the space. Don't yield to the pressure to explain. Let the other person stew. Let them wonder. Let them try to decipher your thoughts. In that gap, they reveal themselves. They tell you who they are, what they fear, what they want. In the next part, we'll go even deeper into the terrain of mystery. Because silence, when used over time, doesn't just protect or pressure. It builds an aura around you, a force field of uncertainty. And in a world desperate for answers, the one who remains unreadable becomes the one they follow. Mystery. It is one of the most potent psychological forces known to man, and silence is the soil in which mystery grows. In today's world where everyone broadcasts their thoughts, routines, and emotions, to remain unseen, to remain a question, is to hold power. Let's take Anna, a senior strategist at a tech firm in San Francisco. She rarely speaks in meetings unless necessary. She doesn't post her thoughts on company forums. She keeps her personal life entirely private. And yet, her influence stretches beyond her role. People ask what she's thinking. They speculate about her next move. They admire her from a distance, not because of what she says, but because of what she doesn't. Why does this work? Because human beings crave certainty. We are wired to seek patterns, predict behavior, and reduce unknowns. When we can't do that, we become anxious. Our minds race to fill the void. There is a fascinating concept in social dynamics about the power of mystique. The less people know about you, the more curious they become to understand you, which can increase your influence. Wise thinkers have often advised that it's prudent to be discerning about what you share. The idea isn't to be secretive, but to foster a sense of depth that encourages others to listen more closely. When people feel they know everything, their attention can fade. But when you remain a person of many layers, they stay engaged and interested in your actions. While their attention is on you, you can stay focused on your goals. This is very relevant today. Think of how people can sometimes diminish their impact by oversharing, like a professional who explains every single step, or a friend who shares every passing thought, a leader who broadcasts every goal. What happens? People stop listening. Familiarity breeds predictability, and predictability invites control. The more transparent you are, the easier you are to manage, to defeat. The counterintuitive truth is this: people don't respect those who are easily understood. They respect those they can't quite grasp, the ones who say less, who act instead of explain, who reveal through outcomes, not words. This doesn't mean being cold or inaccessible. It means being deliberate, strategic. You drop hints, not confessions. You offer glimpses, not blueprints. In a world flooded with noise, silence becomes magnetic. Mystery makes people lean in. They want to know your story, your angle, your motive. And the more they wonder, the more power you hold. That's what we call the enigma effect. It's been studied in behavioral psychology. When someone is harder to read, basit, they are perceived as more competent, more attractive, more trustworthy, even if no objective evidence supports it. So here's your task: build your mystery. Speak less than you think. Share only what's necessary. Don't give people every piece of the puzzle. Let them wonder, let them ask, let them chase shadows. Because while they're trying to figure you out, you're already 10 steps ahead. In the next part, we'll explore how mystery, when paired with surprise, becomes an unstoppable force. Because there is nothing more devastating than a quiet storm that suddenly strikes and no one sees it coming. Surprise is one of the oldest, most effective tools of dominance. And yet, most people give it away before they ever make a move. Why? Because they talk. They explain, they hint, they build anticipation, and in doing so, they sacrifice the element of timing. But when silence and mystery lead the way, the strike, when it comes, feels like thunder on a clear day. Consider Michael, an entrepreneur in Austin. While his competitors made big announcements about future product launches, shared roadmaps, and hyped up investors, Michael said nothing. He operated in silence. No leaks, no social media buzz, just hard work in the background. Then one morning, the industry woke up to headlines. Michael had closed a deal with a Fortune 100 company and quietly cornered a major segment of the market. Competitors were stunned. They didn't even see him coming. This is the strike of silence, the move no one predicts because they weren't allowed to see it build. It's rooted in strategic timing, a principle often emphasized in both military and business strategy: maximum force, minimum warning. And silence is what makes that possible. Let's look back in history. Think of Hannibal's legendary crossing of the Alps. Rome believed geography would protect them. Hannibal didn't argue. He didn't debate. He just acted, silently, methodically. By the time Roman generals realized what was happening, Hannibal was already in position to strike. Silence made it possible. Surprise made it effective. Together they became domination. Even in modern warfare, this principle stands. D-Day, June 6, 1944. The Allies kept their plans secret with intentional misdirection, false signals, and strict silence. The Germans expected an attack elsewhere. When the real strike landed, it was swift and overwhelming. It worked not because of brute force alone, but because the silence beforehand concealed the storm. In psychological terms, this is known as the violation of expectation. When we expect a certain pattern and something completely different occurs, our brains freeze. We don't know how to respond. That gap between anticipation and reality is where the silent strike does its most damage. It overwhelms before defense can even begin. In business, relationships, negotiations, timing is everything, and timing demands silence. If you announce your plans, people prepare for them. If you share your strategy, someone will replicate it. If you brag before the win, you alert those who might stand in your way. But if you keep quiet, build in private, move in shadows, then reveal your success without warning, the impact is tenfold. But make no mistake, this demands discipline. Most people crave validation before victory. They want recognition while they are still building. That craving is ego, and ego is the enemy of surprise. True strength is found in patience, in the ability to delay recognition until the results are undeniable, in the courage to work in silence, trusting the outcome will speak for itself. So ask yourself, do you speak your moves before you make them? Do you post your plans hoping for applause? Or can you stay silent, let go of the need for approval, and strike when no one sees it coming? Because in that moment of surprise, when preparation meets silence, you don't just win, you dominate. In the next part, we'll turn the lens inward. We'll explore how silence doesn't only allow you to attack, it protects you. It becomes the shield that keeps manipulation, betrayal, and sabotage from ever reaching your core. Silence isn't just a weapon, it's armor. In a world filled with manipulation, half-truths, and betrayal, silence becomes your shield. It protects not only your plans, but your emotions, your vulnerabilities, and your identity itself. The less you expose, the less others can exploit. Consider Lisa, a rising executive in a competitive firm in Boston. Early in her career, she was open, too open. She shared her goals, her frustrations, even her doubts with colleagues she thought were friends. Months later, those same words were turned against her in performance reviews and whispered hallway politics. That's when she learned, in high-stakes environments, even your truth can be weaponized if given to the wrong hands. We live in a culture where people are encouraged to speak constantly, to explain, to confess, to be transparent. But transparency without discernment is naivety. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He saw that the most dangerous enemy often hides behind a smile. Not every handshake is sincere. Not every question is innocent. And every word you give away is potential ammunition for someone else's agenda. Look at the lives of leaders who fell not because of bad decisions, but because they trusted the wrong ears. Julius Caesar, betrayed by those closest to him. Richard Nixon, undone not by action, but by his own recorded words. Even in modern times, careers are destroyed overnight because of a careless sentence captured on audio or a post taken out of context. Silence, then, is more than privacy. It's defense. It's the discipline of self-preservation. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop giving others angles to twist. When you don't respond to provocation, you don't leave fingerprints. When you speak only what is necessary, your words gain gravity, and what you withhold becomes a fortress. This applies everywhere. In business, the less you reveal about your internal dynamics, the harder it is for competitors to strategize against you. In relationships, the less you respond emotionally to manipulation, the less power others have over your mood. In social circles, when you stay quiet and gossip, your name remains untouched. Silence reduces risk at every level. Psychologists refer to this as boundary control. It's the conscious decision to decide what parts of yourself are shared and what remain protected. Those with strong psychological boundaries don't overshare. They understand that not every question deserves an answer. Not every moment needs commentary. That measured speech is a sign of inner strength, not weakness. In conflict, this becomes even more important. When someone insults you, silence strips the insult of its oxygen. When someone presses for justification, silence starves their control. The clever comeback might feel satisfying, but the quiet stare speaks louder. It says, "You don't deserve a reaction." And that denial of response is pure dominance. So here's your discipline. Stop explaining. Stop defending. Stop assuming people deserve access to your thoughts, your plans, your heart. They don't. Let your actions speak. Let your results do the talking. Every word you hold back is power retained. In the next part, we bring these threads together. We'll see how silence, mystery, and sudden action form the triangle of total dominance. The philosophy of control isn't just about speaking less. It's about living in such a way that when you do speak, the world listens. Now we arrive at the convergence point, where silence, mystery, and action merge into something greater. A complete philosophy of strategic dominance. At this stage, you're no longer just avoiding noise, you're orchestrating power. This isn't passive behavior. It's an active framework for how to move through life, how to lead, and how to win. Let's look at David, a quiet investor based in Denver. Over the years, he rarely spoke about his portfolio, never gave interviews, never discussed strategy. Friends thought he was simply reserved. Then one day, his company quietly acquired 3 competitors in a single week. No warning, no fanfare, just a move that redefined his entire industry. Suddenly, silence wasn't shyness, it was strategy. Mystery wasn't avoidance, it was positioning. Action wasn't reaction, it was control. This is what we call the triangle of dominance. Silence hides your intentions, mystery clouds your weaknesses, and surprise amplifies your results. Each piece works with the others. Alone, they're useful. Together, they're unstoppable. Why is this so effective? Because people rely on patterns. They expect you to behave the way you've always behaved. When you're loud, they learn to tune you out. When you're consistent, they begin to predict. But when you operate with intentional silence, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability forces others into hesitation. In negotiation, this triangle creates fear. Your silence hides your true position. Your mystery keeps your opponent guessing. And your final offer or refusal strikes with precision, leaving them no time to recover. In leadership, your restraint earns respect. People don't take you for granted because they never know where they stand. Your approval becomes rare and therefore valuable. This isn't manipulation, it's clarity. You are deciding what the world sees. You are choosing when to reveal and when to remain still. This is the essence of power, not in controlling others directly, but in controlling how they experience you. The less they understand, the more carefully they approach. The more carefully they approach, the more control you gain. And here's the most important insight. This philosophy is scalable. It works in high finance, but it also works in your marriage. It works in warfare, but also in friendships. Because silence isn't just a tactic, it's an internal alignment. It means you are not desperate to be seen, not hungry for applause, not reliant on others to validate your path. Think of the greats. Warren Buffett speaks rarely and only with purpose. Steve Jobs was notorious for his veil of secrecy. Even political figures who command global attention often say less than the media wants, precisely because it increases their leverage. The formula is timeless. The more you speak, the more you give. The more you withhold, the more they want. So how do you embody this triangle in daily life? First, say less than necessary in every interaction. Second, cultivate an air of unpredictability. Change your rhythm, your schedule, your focus. Third, take action quietly, then let the results speak louder than any announcement ever could. In the next part, we shift from dominance to endurance. Because silence not only gives you power, it gives you longevity. It shields you from the chaos that consumes those who live by noise. The stillest waters run the deepest, and those who last are the ones who learn to remain still when the world around them is screaming. Endurance. This is where many fail. In the race towards success, most people burn out not because they lack talent, but because they exhaust themselves seeking attention. They talk too much, defend too often, react too quickly. But those who endure understand something different. They know that silence is not just for strategy, it is for survival. Take Robert, a high-level consultant in Washington, D.C. For years, he watched peers rise and fall. Some ascended quickly with bold declarations and flashy promises, only to collapse under scrutiny. Others built reputations on relentless visibility until a single misstep ended it all. Robert, on the other hand, spoke only when necessary. He didn't chase the spotlight. He cultivated respect quietly. Decades later, he remains one of the most trusted minds in his field, not because he was loud, but because he endured. This is the principle of strategic restraint. In a world that rewards instant reaction, silence gives you space. When everyone else is panicking, guessing, overcorrecting, you are observing, analyzing, conserving energy. This is what allows you to last longer. While others chase moments, you build momentum. Look at nature. The tiger does not roar before it strikes. The oak tree grows in silence. The ocean, vast, deep, immovable, speaks only in waves. Stillness is not absence. It is depth, and that depth becomes resilience. It becomes patience, presence, and composure under pressure. It becomes your anchor when chaos rages around you. This is backed by behavioral science. Studies on emotional intelligence show that those who manage their reactions, who pause before speaking, are more respected and more trusted over time. They are seen as stable, dependable, and grounded, not because they always have the right words, but because they choose their words carefully, because they don't flood the world with emotion. They channel it. Silence also protects your mental clarity. When you're not constantly explaining yourself, you free your mind to focus on what matters. You stop giving energy to critics, to doubters, to distractions. You conserve focus for the mission, and in today's world of nonstop opinions, that kind of focus is rare and powerful. Here's a deeper truth. Those who are addicted to being understood never achieve mastery, because they're always seeking permission. But those who can be misunderstood and remain unmoved are the ones who rise. When because they've detached from noise. They don't need the world's approval to validate their vision. Their silence is their affirmation. So if you want to endure, not just win for a moment, but lead for decades, you must build your inner stillness. You must train your mind to pause, to listen, to observe more than you speak. Let silence become your sanctuary. Let it be the space where your power regenerates. In the next part, We examined the battlefield of manipulation, how silence protects you from traps, schemes, and emotional sabotage. Because when you stop reacting, you stop being predictable. And when you're no longer predictable, you become untouchable. Manipulation thrives on reaction. It needs your words. It feeds on your emotions. The more you speak, the more vulnerable you become. But silence, it starves manipulation. It removes the fuel. And when you stop reacting, you become unreadable and therefore untouchable. Meet Evelyn, a project manager in Atlanta. She was the quiet force in a loud office. When others tried to guilt her into taking extra work, she smiled but said little. When someone tried to stir drama, she listened, nodded, and moved on. She didn't defend herself. She didn't fall for the bait. Over time, those who tried to manipulate her lost power. They couldn't penetrate her boundaries because she gave them no leverage. This is the heart of psychological defense: restraint. Manipulators, whether in the workplace or personal life, thrive on predictability. They want to know your triggers, your insecurities, your need to be liked. But when you stop broadcasting those needs, when your silence becomes your baseline, they're left with nothing to exploit. Think of a provocation. Someone insults you in public. Boy, the average person feels compelled to reply, to defend, to strike back. But the wise person understands. Silence is the counterattack. It denies the instigator the satisfaction of a response. And in that silence, the aggressor becomes exposed. Their tactics, their desperation, their weakness, all revealed while you remain composed. This is not passivity, it's precision. You are choosing to disengage not because you are powerless, but because you are in control. Emotional control is the rarest form of power today. In a world where outrage is currency, silence is rebellion. And that rebellion gives you freedom from manipulation, from drama, from chaos. This is supported by research in emotional regulation. When you choose not to react immediately, the emotional centers in your brain, particularly the amygdala, lose intensity. Your prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason, takes over. You see the game clearly. You make better decisions. You stop playing by their rules. Machiavelli would have called this insulation, not isolation, because you are still present, still aware, but insulation from emotional entanglement. You are no longer a puppet pulled by every string of opinion or accusation. Your silence becomes your boundary, your force field. In relationships, this is even more vital. Whether romantic, familial, or professional, the moment you stop reacting to manipulation, you shift the power dynamic. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself when you're misunderstood. You no longer chase validation. And that restraint forces others to face themselves. So here is your tool. When provoked, pause. When accused, wait. When baited, say nothing. Let silence stretch. Let discomfort build in the other. Most will fill it with their own insecurities. They will expose themselves. And you? You will remain intact. In the next part, we'll explore how to weaponize silence in negotiation, not just as a defense, but as a strategic advantage that causes your opponents to overextend, overtalk, and ultimately overplay their hand. Negotiation isn't about who talks the most. It's about who controls the space between the words. And the one who masters silence, who lets others speak, reveal, and overreach, often walks away with the deal. Silence in negotiation isn't absence. It's pressure. It's presence without noise. It's power without display. Picture Daniel, a seasoned executive in a Dallas firm, sitting across from a vendor pitching a multi-million-dollar contract. The vendor talks eagerly, outlining pricing, timelines, bonuses, hoping for feedback, looking for cues. But Daniel remains quiet, not because he's unsure, but because he knows something the vendor doesn't. The first person to speak in a negotiation often loses. When Daniel takes a moment to listen, the vendor often shares more details, clarifying the terms and explaining the options to better meet Daniel's needs. With each piece of new information, Daniel's understanding of the situation grows. This communication approach is based on a simple observation. People are often happy to fill a quiet moment in a conversation. Many feel a natural desire to keep the dialogue flowing. If you can comfortably hold that quiet space, you encourage a more open and balanced exchange. The other person has a chance to share, and you have a chance to listen. This technique can be helpful in many situations, from professional discussions to everyday interactions. The next time you're presented with an idea, it can be beneficial to pause, breathe, and simply listen. Watch how quickly they speak again, often improving their position before you've even responded. Silence also protects you from giving away too much. When you're nervous or eager, you tend to explain, to justify, to talk yourself into a weaker position. But when you stay silent, you listen. And in listening, you gain information about what they value, what they fear, what they need to win. With that insight, you shape your strategy. You strike when it matters. This is how master negotiators win. Not through force, but through presence, through calm, through the kind of stillness that makes others uneasy. Silence becomes the mirror that reflects the other party's intent, and most people don't like what they see in that mirror. That's when they overcompensate, and that's when you win. In any important conversation, this approach is valuable. Think of a discussion you've seen, one person speaking quickly, eager to sound knowledgeable, while the other listens, nods, and waits. The one who is thoughtful with their words guides the tempo. They project confidence through composure. They listen more and learn much. So how do you apply this in your own life? First, practice pausing. When someone asks a question, don't rush to answer. When someone gives you an offer, take a moment with it. When you feel the urge to explain, resist. Let a moment of quiet work on your behalf. Second, observe the dynamic. Watch how people respond when you don't fill the air. Some will elaborate, some will clarify their own thoughts, some will offer more details. Let them. Because every word they speak while you're listening is an opportunity for greater understanding. In the next part, we move from silence as strategy to silence as identity. You'll learn how to embody stillness, not just in moments of pressure, but as a way of being. Because real power isn't in how you speak, it's in how little you need to. Power is not just what you do, it's who you are when nothing is happening. And this is where silence becomes more than a tactic. It becomes identity, the ability to embody stillness, to be unmoved in the face of chaos, to need nothing from anyone to feel whole. That is where real power lives. Consider Sarah, a trauma therapist in Seattle. Her presence alone shifts the energy of a room. She doesn't rush to fill silences during a session. She doesn't flop out her clients with advice. She listens, intently, calmly, without judgment. And in that stillness, something happens. People begin to hear themselves. They unravel. They reflect. They grow. Why? Because her silence isn't absence. It's presence. It's an invitation for truth. This is the paradox of modern life. We're surrounded by noise, digital, emotional, conversational. And in this noise, people confuse volume with value. They equate expression with connection. But more often than not, the deepest connections are born in quiet. The moments where nothing is said, but everything is felt. In psychology, this is called effective resonance, the emotional impact of a presence that doesn't need to speak to be felt. People who have mastered this don't just use silence strategically, they live it. It becomes their emotional posture. They're not reactive. They don't seek validation. They're grounded. And that's what unnerves people the most. When you stop needing to prove yourself, others don't know how to engage you. When you're no longer dancing for approval, others begin to respect your rhythm. This is what philosophers like Baruch Spinoza described as inner freedom. Not freedom from rules, but freedom from internal compulsion. The freedom to remain still when the world demands motion. When silence becomes your identity, your words carry more weight. Because you're no longer speaking from a place of insecurity, but of certainty. You don't need to convince anyone. You already believe in yourself. That belief doesn't need amplification. It stands quietly, like a mountain, unmoved by wind. So how do you build this? You stop chasing noise. You stop seeking external confirmation. You choose restraint over reaction. You create space in your daily life, time without distraction, conversation without interruption, decisions without disclosure. And in that space, your inner voice grows louder. Your intuition sharpens. Your presence deepens. When people meet you, they'll sense something different, a depth they can't explain, a calm they can't shake, a power they can't challenge. And they won't know why, but you will, because you've made silence your foundation, your resting state, your source of clarity. In the next part, at Depart, we explore how this internal silence becomes a signal to others. How the still mind, the quiet confidence, the unspoken certainty begins to draw respect, admiration, and even influence without you ever needing to ask for it. When you truly embody silence, something unexpected begins to happen. People listen more even when you say less. They lean in, they pay attention. Because in a world filled with noise, silence becomes a signal, a beacon of authority, clarity, and self-possession. This is when silence transcends identity and becomes influence. Meet Charles, a leadership coach in Philadelphia. In meetings, he rarely speaks first. When he does speak, he chooses his words like a craftsman selects his tools, carefully, precisely. He doesn't try to dominate the room. He doesn't perform. But when he offers insight, the room goes still. Not because he demands it, but because he's earned it. His restraint gives his voice weight. This is called the scarcity principle. In behavioral economics, when something is scarce, it becomes more valuable. The same applies to speech. If you speak less, what you do say becomes more impactful. People know it's deliberate. They know it matters. That's the paradox of influence. The less you seek it, the more of it you gain. This silent influence also builds what psychologists refer to as the aura effect, a sense that someone possesses unexplainable gravitas. You can't quite define it, but you feel it. It's not charisma, it's not charm, it's presence. The kind of presence that doesn't announce itself, but fills the space it's in. And that presence is born from inner silence, from knowing who you are without needing others to confirm it. Think of the most respected leaders throughout history. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't need to shout to lead a movement. His power was in his calm. His voice carried conviction, not noise. Or take the example of Rosa Parks. Her quiet refusal to stand wasn't a speech, it was a statement. Her silence in that moment became a roar heard across a nation. Even in business, look at someone like Warren Buffett. He doesn't speak often. He rarely reacts to headlines or public provocation. But when he does speak, the entire financial world listens. Why? Because he has a reputation for disciplined thought, for quiet execution, for silence until it's time to act. That reputation has become influence. You don't need a platform to have influence. You need alignment. When your actions match your silence, when people see that you live what you don't say, you become the example. And influence is nothing more than being the example others want to follow. Not through persuasion, but through presence. So here's the practical challenge. In your next conversation, say 30% less than you normally would. Watch what happens. Notice how others respond. Practice the art of speaking only when it truly matters. Let your silence invite curiosity. Let your actions carry the message. In the next part, we explore how silence is not only magnetic, it's transformational. How your quiet confidence doesn't just shape others, but slowly reshapes the world around you. Because when you live with less noise, you start to create space for deeper things to emerge. Truth, trust, and true leadership. Transformation doesn't come through noise. It comes through depth, through presence, through intention. And this is where silence becomes more than personal power. It becomes a force for reshaping the world around you. Quiet confidence, practiced daily, radiates. It sets a tone, it elevates the standard. Take Monica, a school principal in Minneapolis. Her campus was once chaotic. Teachers overwhelmed, students disengaged, energy scattered. But Monica didn't respond with noise. She didn't issue long-winded speeches or impose 100 new rules. She began with presence. She walked the halls quietly. She listened deeply in staff meetings. She asked more questions than she answered. Slowly, people began to mirror her calm. The school settled. Communication sharpened, performance rose, not because of slogans, but because of energy. Stillness, when embodied by a leader, becomes contagious. This is how culture is changed, not by shouting louder, but by modeling what others crave but cannot name. Steadiness. In psychological terms, this is called emotional contagion. Human beings naturally reflect the emotional state of those they perceive as leaders. If you're reactive, others are become anxious. If you're grounded, others begin to calm down. Your silence becomes a permission slip for others to slow down, think clearly, and rise above the noise. This applies in families, teams, organizations, and even friendships. When you resist the urge to control conversations, you give others space to find their own voice. When you don't rush to fill silence, others feel seen. Bon point, mais you're seen, not overwhelmed. When you model calm under pressure, others realize they can too. You become an anchor, not because you talk people through storms, but because you don't get swept away by them. Look at effective therapists, coaches, and mentors. The most transformational ones aren't the loudest. They're the ones who sit with you in silence, who hold space for your breakthrough to arise. Not from them, but from within you. This is the deepest form of leadership, guiding without pushing, influencing without intruding, changing lives without demanding credit. And that's the opportunity silence gives you to stop trying to change people with words and start shaping the environment with your energy, to create cultures where listening is valued more than shouting, where thought precedes speech, where people feel depth, not just direction, where wisdom leads, not ego. This kind of transformation doesn't happen overnight. It takes consistency, restraint, patience. But over time, it builds something lasting. Respect. Not the loud kind that needs constant applause, but the quiet kind that lives in people's minds long after you've left the room. So reflect. What energy do you bring into rooms? Are you the spark or the storm? Are you filling space or deepening it? When you walk in silence with purpose, you become the calm in the chaos, the signal in the static. And in doing so, you begin to transform more than just yourself. You reshape the atmosphere around you. In the next part, we'll move toward culmination. We'll take this philosophy of silence and apply it to the ultimate discipline, knowing when to act, how to strike, and when to return again to stillness. Because the rhythm of power is not constant motion. It is silence, impact, retreat. Power is not a straight line. It is a rhythm, and that rhythm follows a pattern few ever master. Silence, impact, retreat. This is the cycle of enduring dominance. The ones who rise the highest in any field are not constantly talking, acting, or proving. They know when to disappear, when to strike, and when to vanish again into silence. Consider James, a political strategist in Chicago. He spent most of his time off the grid, no social media presence, no public commentary, no brand building. But every few years in the thick of an election cycle, his name would surface. One brilliant campaign, one decisive victory, then quiet again. No interviews, no gloating, just results, followed by retreat. This rhythm kept his reputation sharp, his mystique alive, and his influence growing. He let others burn out in the spotlight. He moved in shadows, striking only when it mattered. This mirrors how elite military units operate. They do not linger. They infiltrate, strike with precision, then vanish. The mission is the focus, not recognition. In leadership, it's the same. If you're constantly performing, you become predictable. Your presence dulls. But when you disappear, then reemerge with force, your influence lands like a hammer. Unexpected. Unstoppable. This is also how nature works. Consider the seasons. The tree doesn't bloom year-round. It rests. It pulls inward. Then, when the conditions are right, it flourishes again. This rhythm is vital, not just for survival, but for sustainability. If you are always in motion, always producing, always speaking, you lose power. You dilute it, but if you time your movement, your words, your presence, each becomes sharper, heavier, more lasting. Silence before the strike builds tension. Mystery during preparation clouds your opponent's vision. An impact, when it comes without warning, hits harder than any loud buildup ever could. But just as important as the strike is the return to stillness. After you win, retreat. After you speak, be silent again. Let your results echo in the emptiness. This goes against ego. Ego wants applause. Ego wants to linger in victory. But mastery wants control. And control means knowing when to pull back, when to rest in the shadows, when to make the world miss you. Machiavelli understood this. He taught that rulers should not only be feared and respected, but unpredictable. And unpredictability requires disappearance. If people can always see you, they adjust. If they always hear you, they tune out. But if you appear only when needed and always with impact, you become unforgettable. So what's your rhythm? Do you speak constantly or only with precision? Do you show up endlessly or strategically? Are you predictable or powerful? In the next and final part, we will bring it all together. We'll reflect on how silence, when lived fully, becomes not just a strategy, but a way of being, a way of walking through the world untouchable, unshaken, and undeniable. We have arrived at the end, but truly it's only the beginning. Because silence, once understood, isn't just a technique. It's a philosophy, a lifelong discipline, a worldview that reshapes how you lead, how you move, how you live. And when practiced consistently, it becomes your edge in every arena. The world is loud. People scream for attention. They explain themselves endlessly. They chase validation like oxygen. And in doing so, they leak power with every word. But you will be different. You will learn to shut up, not out of fear, but out of strength. Not because you have nothing to win, but because you've learned the power of saying less. When you hold your silence, you control the frame. You force the world to adjust to your rhythm. When others panic, you pause. When they overexpose, you withdraw. When they seek approval, you remain grounded. And in that difference, you rise. Quietly, unshakably. Remember, your silence is your protection. It shields you from manipulation, betrayal, and distraction. It's your strategy. It hides your intent, clouds your weaknesses, and multiplies your impact. But even more than that, it's your identity. When silence becomes who you are, not just what you do, you move through life untouchable. Look again at history. The greatest leaders, thinkers, warriors, they didn't win by noise. They won by timing, by restraint, by letting others waste energy while they observed, calculated, and struck with precision. You must become the same. Still, present, focused. You will not win through noise. You will win through control. So here's your final truth. Silence is power, and not temporary power, but lasting, grounded, earned power. The kind that doesn't need applause. The kind that walks into a room and is felt, not heard. The kind that doesn't fight for recognition because it knows its own worth. The world will keep talking. Let them. You listen, watch, build in the dark, strike only when it counts, then disappear again into the quiet. This is how you move with purpose. This is how you lead without shouting. This is how you dominate without ever needing to prove it. Thank you for walking through this philosophy with me. If these words stirred something inside you, if they challenged you, if they made you pause, then let that silence shape your next step. Now, if you found value in this journey, I invite you to take action. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us how silence has shaped your life or how you plan to use it from now on. Because wisdom grows in reflection, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all.